This is not only a baller looking used $400 gaming PC, but this build is also packing some serious price to performance, and I can't wait to show you these benchmarks. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today I'm going to be showing you a tour around what's all inside this $400 used gaming PC. I'll show you some alternate parts if you're thinking about replicating this build, and then of course, we're going to benchmark it. And then just as a quick reminder, I do stream all of my gaming PC builds over on twitch.tv/Zach's Tech Turf every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure you're following me over there. But yeah, let's check this build out. Before jumping straight into the parts list, if you enjoy watching some other gaming PC build guides just like this one, then feel free to hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. But yeah, let's start with the CPU, and this here is the Intel i5-7500, which isn't a typical option that you've seen on my channel. This is linked down in the description, by the way, along with everything else that we talk about. I was actually hunting for a much cheaper i5-7400, but I ended up buying one and then getting scammed on eBay, but I got all my money back, so don't worry. But this i5-7500 can still certainly pack a punch at still somewhat of a budget value. I personally paid $100 from this from our good friend Tim over in the ZTT Discord, and this processor is packing 4 cores and 4 threads with a max turbo clock of 3.8 GHz right out of the box. Speaking of that ZTT Discord though, this is turning into a true PC builders resource, as we not only have a baller community, but also a ZTT builds channel where we post a ton of gaming PC build guides from both me and the community, and also a deals channel to help save you some money. Now the reason I picked up this 7th gen Intel CPU wasn't actually because of the spec sheet or anything, but rather because of these crazy deals on the B250 crypto mining motherboards, which was the true inspiration for this build. This here is the BioStar TB250 BTC Pro, which was definitely used previously for mining, and it was really dusty and dirty, and I had to perform a little Tech Yes City loving on it before I could even use the thing. These motherboards are going for super cheap over on eBay, and speaking of eBay and buying things online, it's incredibly important to remember to take your online security very seriously, which is why I hooked up with Dashlane to sponsor today's video. Dashlane is a secure management tool that can generate and manage complex passwords across all of your website accounts and across all of your devices. That way you don't have to remember them, and so you can use a different password for every account. Dashlane can also autofill these passwords into websites, which is super convenient, and it can even fill out forms with 2 clicks, keeping your payments secure and fast so you don't have to go looking for your wallet. Dashlane also makes your online life safer with their VPN, which allows you to browse the internet privately without being tracked. Start making your online life safer and easier by heading to dashlane.com/ZTT to get Dashlane for free on your first device, and then when you want to upgrade to premium, use my code ZTT to save 25%. Going back to this motherboard, I paid $40 for mine, but then I found some going for as little as $20. If you pair this with an even cheaper i5-7400, like I said earlier, this could be a nasty price to performance CPU motherboard combo. The main thing you need to ensure with these motherboards is that it has a PCIe 3.0 Gen 3 slot for a graphics card, that way you can use it for a baller gaming PC. Speaking of which, the GPU that I went with for today's build fits our aesthetics perfectly. This is the MSI 8GB R9 390, which I recently featured in my top GPUs under $100 video, which you can check out in the upper right hand corner. I paid $90 for this card, and you'll see soon in the benchmarking section that although this is a bit of a power hog and a little bit older now, that it can still pack a punch here with some 2020 1080p gaming action. Next up is the RAM, and this is a 2x8GB Time Tech kit, which is only clocked at 2400 MHz, but Intel isn't nearly as reliant on faster RAM like Ryzen is, so this is perfectly fine. I would recommend going with any cheaper DDR4 kit that you can find, preferably used in a budget used build like this one, and I ended up paying just $40 for my kit here. I also ended up spending $40 on 2 more parts. The first one is the SSD, specifically this 480GB PNY drive. Doesn't have DRAM, so it's definitely a budget option, but I actually scooped this up on a killer deal on Amazon brand new. This was one of those lightning deals that didn't last for more than like 10 minutes. I didn't even know which build I was buying it for. I just bought it and scooped it up as fast as I could, and this is a great reason why you need to be in our Discord server, specifically the ZTT Deals channel. Moving on to the last $40 part, we have the power supply, and this is the Seasonic M12II 620 watt, and this was a pretty good used find. This model is 80+ bronze certified, fully modular with all black cables, and it's rated tier D, so it's a decent option for budget builds like this one. And finally, the last main component of this build is the case, and if you're watching the Twitch live stream, you'll know that this was a very last minute audible. This is the Deepcool Matrix 55, which I indeed like for the price, but I would really recommend just going with any case that you personally like for around that $50 mark. The Matrix 55 can fit a full-size ATX motherboard motherboard, which is what we need here. It's rocking a pretty clean front glass design to show off our RGB intake fans. There's little room for intake on the side, so airflow isn't exceptional as you would expect, and there's even an RGB front strip for those of you interested in that. I'm not a fan that there isn't a PSU shroud, and I don't like how I had to mount my SSD like this, but overall this is certainly a good enough budget option that is rocking a clean design to it. With the important parts out of the way, just like always, we do have some optional aesthetic only parts. As you guys know, I don't include these in the final parts list because they aren't mandatory, but they really do make the build look that much better. The first ones are the RGB fans, and this is a set of the Deepcool RF120s, which I've used in a ton of other build guides. These can either be connected to a motherboard's RGB port, which our mining motherboard obviously doesn't have, so I'll use my favorite choice, which is just a button clicker that's hooked up to SATA power, and it's very easy to use. Our next aesthetic part is a little bit more important, and that's the CPU cooler. This is the Arctic Freezer 33, and the reason why I'm saying that this still isn't a requirement is because you could use the Intel stock cooler or even a much cheaper cooler, and you don't need this, although this Freezer 33 is very nice for the price. To be honest, the only reason I went with the Freezer 33 is because I already had it in my studio, and it does indeed perform very well, but just make sure that if you're buying a used CPU that you know if it does or does not come with a stock cooler, and you'll be perfectly fine. With that being said, here's what the final parts list is looking like, and these are pretty typical prices for most of these parts, so you shouldn't have that much problem replicating this build. If you are indeed trying to replicate this build or somewhat replicate it, then I do want to include some alternate parts that you can use if maybe you can't find one of these parts, or maybe you just want to upgrade one of them. Afterwards, we'll get into the benchmarks. So first up is the CPU, and like I said earlier, I think that there's even more price to performance if you got a less powerful i5-7400, but only at the right price of around $50 to $60. The Seasonic 620 watt power supply can easily be replaced for any 600 watt-ish power supply, and I would highly recommend checking out EVGA B stock because they've been selling a ton of used power supplies just like the good old days. And finally, if you don't want or can't find the R9 390, you could definitely go with a similarly performing GTX 970 or even a much newer RX 570 for around the same price point. And now with the parts list out of the way, it's time for my favorite part of the video, the benchmarks obviously. And just like always, make sure you check out the upper left-hand part of the screen during the benchmarking run to see the balance between the CPU and GPU utilization and the temperatures. The first game up was Fortnite, of course. Everyone knows that I'm the Fortnite god at this point, and in 1080p in pro settings, aka low with far view distance, we got a very solid FPS average of 163, and yes, that 1% low would definitely be increased if you lock that FPS to your monitor's refresh rate, but I had it at unlimited for today's testing. Next up was The Division 2. This is currently my personal flavor of the month game right now, and in 1080p and medium settings, I was very happy with a 68 FPS average with this tough of a game to run. Speaking of another tough one, Assassin's Creed Odyssey was next. This one is an incredibly CPU dependent game, and in 1080p and medium settings, I got an average of 56 frames per second. After that was Rainbow Six Siege, still working my way through the single player situations for this one, so try not to judge, and in 1080p and very high settings, I got an average of 148 FPS. Far Cry New Dawn followed. Remember, I added this one to our list because you guys stated in the community tab that a ton of you are still playing this, and in 1080p and medium settings, I got 70 frames per second. Counter-Strike Global Offensive followed, and during a deathmatch mode in 1080p and low settings, I got 178 FPS. Next up, I tested Gears 5. The footage that you're watching is from the online horde mode, which was actually really fun, but I did test it with the built-in benchmarking tool just like always, and in 1080p and high settings, I got 66 FPS. After that was time for some PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and in 1080p and medium settings, I got a pretty solid FPS average of 88, still definitely a tough one to run. Getting towards the end here, we get to Borderlands 3. This one will definitely push your GPU to the limit, and in 1080p medium settings with the built-in benchmarking tool, I got 57 FPS. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Warzone was after that, and in 1080p and medium settings, I got 81 FPS. And finally, for the last game in this ridiculous 11 game benchmarking run, we have Valorant. I just now discovered that you can play the much shorter Spike Rush game mode, so I'm all for that, and in 1080p and medium settings, I got an FPS average of 184. So as you can see, this system can definitely do some serious damage here in 2020 1080p gaming despite the slightly older hardware, and overall, I'm definitely really happy with how this one turned out. Be sure to let me know in the comment section what you thought of this build and what changes you would personally make to it. Don't forget to step up your online privacy game with Dashlane, and finally, I hope you enjoyed this video.